Hello, everyone, and welcome to this artist talk, and welcome to the 52nd annual edition of the International Film Festival Rotterdam. My name is Christina. I'm a programmer of short film here, and I'll be moderating this talk with ARC, though we'll probably be using the name ARC and Tooth interchangeably, which we'll probably get to in a second. But I also wanted to maybe give a bit of context for how this talk came into being way back in a way. I first met Tooth almost a decade ago. I was touring North America with a program of experimental short films or experimental narrative, and I wanted to stop in the Bay Area, and I was told that Black Hole Cinematheque, a space that Tooth has been running for a long time, was the spot to do that. And I wrote to you. You were really enthusiastic. We booked the show. I was very excited. I arrived in Oakland very eager to see the space, and I pulled up to what looked like a hovel, an empty church, or what was once a church, and inside were makeshift rooms made out of plywood and a mattress and all kinds of detritus from a party, and I thought there's no way this could be the right place, and I thought maybe I'd made a huge mistake. And I met Tooth, and he moved quite slowly in preparing the space, and I thought, wow, we're going to start really soon, and I don't know what's going to happen. And within 2 hours, we had one of the best cinemas I've ever been to ready for us, with the most beautiful, packed audience, a really loving community of people who were really receptive to the work. And at the end, Tooth said, yeah, you know, if you like it, you could move here and be a part of this. And within a year, I was living in Oakland, California. So I think that's a really appropriate lens to start this conversation, because I think we're going to talk a lot about community building and yeah, the way you've engaged with the film community in Oakland for so long. But before we get to that, maybe you would like to introduce yourself briefly.
My name's Tooth, and I'm... The idea about using ARC interchangeably is more, I'm not ARC, but I help a process into being that is ARC, which is, I kind of use it as a way to sidestep the idea of authority, but authorship as well. I talk about ARC as like a point of encounter that with the work, but the work is a process, and there's a chain of, I look at it as like movement of energy that has a chain of conductors, and those conductors include me, the apparatus that I use, the film projectors and the film and the series of manipulations to the film, and then more importantly, or less importantly, well, more importantly, the viewer, because I believe that, you know, the chain of conduction includes the intersubjective process of viewing the work, and therefore all of that is kind of implicated within the process that is ARC for me. So everyone has their own kind of agency in it. And I don't particularly own the meaning of the works either.
And I think in the programs we saw yesterday, you know, you brought up that the multi-channel or the expanded cinema works, they're performances, but actually so are the single-channel works. They're also performances, and maybe you can elaborate a bit on that, because I thought that was quite an important but also charming detail.
Yeah, I mean, part of what I think expanded cinema does is, like in single-channel works, there's often an idea, especially in narrative works and works that kind of like have a one-to-one relationship to the viewer's sense of reality. And there's this idea that you can kind of be subsumed into the reality of the film. You identify with a character or don't identify, and you kind of you either place yourself in it, or you or you place yourself at or remove from it. But when you complicate that, sometimes simply in just complicating the frame, throwing it out of focus, adding another frame, doing something that foregrounds I think what it does when you break that relationship is that it foregrounds the live aspect of it and the idea that you are a perceiving body and a physical body in a space, and it foregrounds space in general, the space of the viewing, wherever you might be viewing it, whether it's, you know, in a non-traditional space, in a cinema space, and you will become aware ever so subtly or maybe very explicitly of the architecture of the space, and then of your own inner space, your body and your perceiving mind, and then the space of the frame. And you know, you can zoom far out and far in on that in regards to, I don't know, I think in that sense, our film is like working in architecture in a sense, but also that's also present in single channel works, and it's just less explicit. And I mean, what we're doing when we're seeing anything with our eyes, but also film is a way to focus this concept, but the eyes are built for anything that we perceive ocularly is photons, and we look at objects just as we look at the objects that are filmed in the whatever is on the screen. We're using the same facilities. We are using photons to form a visual map that transfers into our perceptual systems, into brain chemistry, and it makes a map of the object, but it's never directly engaged with the object. And in that sense, you know, the reality of the screen is just as illusory or just as real as the reality in our, you know, daily waking life. And I think that in a way, single channel films is a way to kind of focus that perceptual either remoteness or engagement, and also to say that, like, because you're not watching a fixed object, even if it's celluloid, you're watching these massless photons, this abstract energy, and therefore it's never going to be the same thing. It's always going to be a live thing. And in a more I guess, concrete way, I mean, the other night when I was showing a single channel film, it got fucked up in the gate. I had to redo it, stopped it, and I like that because it's, you know you're in the presence of, well, you reground yourself in the world, and you understand that every festival projectionist, every camera person, every light, you know, they know this is a performance also. They know it's a live thing. You don't have to tell. It's only this illusion with the viewer that it's not a performance.
Yeah, and I also, one of my favorite parts of Arc 2 was when you read aloud the credits at the end, because they just weren't printed on the film for whatever reason. I mean, it is quite expensive to print on film, and I think it's a totally sufficient and in many ways even better intervention to just speak aloud, you know, and this idea that that the projectionist or the person behind the projector or the camera, these are just invisible appendages of the machine itself is also quite absurd. And then there's this break in the darkness where you come in with your voice, a very human voice. Well, you are human, but not more human than others, but this human element to interject and to kind of connect with the audience. And yeah, maybe you could talk a bit about what it means to be okay with things being imperfect and to run with that.
Yeah. I mean, part of the whole reality of the two shows, there were two programs that ran twice in the last 2 days, for those that weren't there. And the first one in particular, you know, it's using a lot of elements that are not just projectors, but like optics, and I mean, there's a whole acrobatics to it, and that acrobatics includes not just my films, but or not just my work to make the films finished in time, but the work of all of the tech crew and all of everyone, like a lot of moving parts. And I think that when you hide that, it creates a certain illusion of it invisibilizes a certain labor that is underlying everything, even the slickest corporatized film festivals. There's a lot of work that goes into hiding the splices, so to speak, and that's one reason why I really like to, kind of foreground the splices in my work. It's like it's dirty and it's what it is, and I like to. I think that the aspect of at first when I came here, I thought, well, I want to make new prints. I want to have everything run smoothly, and it's like, anyone that's involved in expanded cinema for long enough, you run into a lot of train wrecks, and so you think you learn from this, you want to kind of hone it in another way, but there's always going to be some train wrecks. Sometimes they get smoother, but for me, that's kind of like. It's not only complicating the human presence in these performances, but it's making us have to stop our idea of our connection to linear time, and it complicates that a little bit so subtly or obviously. And that's something that's important in the works, but it's also like important that it's actually like an interjection into your day. Like you have to kind of decide, maybe it's annoying that this is running 20 minutes late because it's not professional or something, but capitalism ingrains such a particular reliance on linear time in regards to how much you have to sleep and how much you have to be at work and how much you have to have leisure time. It's all dictated by the mode of production, and anything that kind of throws a wrench in that, you have to renegotiate why it's so frustrating and why it throws off your balance. And then you have to think, is it really frustrating, or is it because I'm tied into this chain of command, and it may be frustrating to me too, but we all have to kind of reorient ourselves in those times, and sometimes it's not worth it, but sometimes it is.
Yeah, I mean, for me, working within the festival, there is this really fixed idea of agenda and one film after the other, and it becomes quite ephemeral that you move through these works and you process them quickly and move on to the next. And actually, it was kind of a relief to go into your screening and just feel like, yeah, well, there might be imperfections, but I've signed up for this, and let's go for the ride. And for a moment, it becomes a real interruption to the sort of industrialization of the moving image. And you really do enter into a different awareness of time and a different space of time also, which is important to the work. And I mean, we'll talk also about materiality later. And why people have to be present in their bodies to experience this work. But before we get there, I wanted to talk a bit more of the performative elements in the work, particularly the music. I know you have a background. You started out in a lot of punk bands, also doing noise performances. And some of the works are very deliberately silent, kind of in a tradition that's familiar to people in the avant-garde, but then also quite a lot of the works incorporate live sound performed by you or sourced live. Maybe you could talk a bit about how sound works into your process.
Well, it's never. First of all, none of the pieces that are silent are ever really silent. It's like there's always it just. And then the soundtracks, it also incorporates the sound of the room, the perceiving space, but. Sound is as important as image to me, but in the sense that they're never a separate thing. They're interconnected, and for me, the silent pieces are more just like it raises the room sound, or the sound of the, when we had the projections mostly from the room rather than in the booth. It foregrounds the machine also, so that's important. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that sound is also like a way to kind of just focus a certain moment of perception. Sometimes I like to run sound for a long time in a dark room just to kind of like ease someone into. Some of the pieces use very low light, and I think that your mind doesn't get there at first. You can't just turn it on and you're there, and so sometimes the sound helps level the field a little bit, but just. I mean, also sound is really physical. It's. We have this idea, as I was kind of talking about with objects in relation to photons. I mean, we have this idea that we have a physical connection to a lot of, like certain artworks are more physical or less physical. And I think, in a way, we have such a remoteness to objects physically on the level of like quantum physics, in the sense that all objects have. Is it electrons? Yeah, an electron force field that keeps us with a superfine force field from actually interacting with any other object. We're getting our sense of touch is a sense of force fields interacting with other force fields. And everything that we see with our eyes is an abstract interpretation of light bouncing off another object. But sound is really interesting because it's super physical, and it's vibrations of air, and it actually enters your ear. So it goes into your body in a way that no other art form really can in that sense. I mean, photons, yes, but yeah. So I like that. I mean, I like how it foregrounds a physical presence in the perceiving body.
Yeah, and when we were putting this program together, I remember we were talking about how would we organize the works into the two separate programs and also within the context of each other. And I remember asking, like, would you prefer a chronological order? Would you want the works to show some sort of trajectory or like linear development? And you said no, and that isn't even necessarily applicable because many of the works are reworkings of old works, or no process is really completed. And I know you said that that's also true just for the works are also reimagined every single projection of them. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about not just the time within the space of the screening room, but just the time overall in your entire body of work.
Yeah, I mean, definitely fuck linear time. It's like absolute poison to our perceptual systems and to the world in general. But in my work, it's kind of inconsequential in a certain sense, because I mean, I think anyone who works with celluloid specifically, like in relation to, like you think less about how long this is. You think about it in how many frames is this? How fast is this moving with those frames? And you get into a real abstracted sense of time, and that relates always to kind of the chronology, because professionalism will always kind of destroy the impulse that I'm interested in, and one of those ways is the kind of professionalism that's connected to academic study, industry professionalization. This way of kind of flattening things out and saying, this is your filmography. But there's always holes. No one's going to tell you their whole filmography, because there's stuff that they're not going to be, they're embarrassed by or something. So people are always editing it. But for me, it's like, the works change all the time. You know, especially with prints, it's like, you know, I made a print of Ascensions in 2017, but it didn't turn out right, so I changed something in it, and it's, you know, I changed enough in it that it's actually, I reshot parts of it, and they're similar to the other one, but it's a new film also, so why not put a new year on it? You know, it's 2017 to 2020. But, you know, I just made a new print of it for this screening too, so might as well change it to then. But it's also like, why even put a year on it? And with Broken Symmetry, for instance, that started as a performance that literally changed programmatically every time it was performed. It started out with this drawn kind of hexagonal shape, and it was 3 or 4 projectors, and the hexagonal shape would rotate, and it would be overlaid on another hexagonal shape, and it would form this kind of interference pattern. But the thing is that every performance, I would create new loops that, at the end of that performance, it would create a interference pattern with all of the hexagons at once, and the ending configuration of each performance was the beginning configuration of the other one. So it became this, what you see now in it wasn't when it kind of reached its like point of like, okay, I cannot keep adding hexagons because it'll just be this circle of light. So it's almost circular, but that I thought it's complex enough that it's gonna be like that. But inevitably, there's life interjects in the process, and it's like, I had these loops that I hand dyed, and that was kind of the piece, and I would do it like that for a while. But I was traveling last summer, did a performance in this film commune in the Alps, and I lost the loops. They stayed there. And so I thought, well, I gotta I had the negatives still, but then I lost those, and then I had one loop left. So I reprinted that, and then re-dyed it actually in my hotel room just before the performance. So it's totally new, but it's relatively similar to the one before. But I mean, it's like that one, it's cannibalizing itself constantly, and it's same with all the works. But also, yeah, I mean, they're new every time you see them.
These are all documentation of live performances on film, and they really don't translate quite appropriately in digital,
No.
but hopefully that applies some kind of a context. And we will talk a bit about, film and the significance of using that medium in a minute. But I think to get there, we also would have to talk about all the ways that you work in film, of course, through the process of ARC and developing ARC works, but also as I came to know you through Black Hole Cinematheque, which, for the audience to know, Black Hole Cinematheque is a free and open to the public cinematheque is it still in Oakland?
Still in Oakland.
Still in
Working
Oakland.
on reconfiguring.
Yeah, I can imagine in constant reconfiguration, but that's also kind of what makes it so special. And I think this free and open to the public thing is really, really important and really rare. And I think it democratizes cinema in a way, especially because, a lot of people in the Bay Area who aren't at this point extremely wealthy live in precarity. So that public around you are going to be people who are already relatively excluded from cinema or the cinematic spaces anyway, either because they're not invited to them or because they can't afford entry. So I think this always I found very moving and important, especially in a place like the Bay Area, which is like the epicenter of digital capitalism. Yeah. But you also run the Black Hole Collective Lab, which is an all artist run.
Well, I help run it.
But, yes, of course, it's a collective. Which it's artist run, so everybody is part of the lab. The lab is everybody, I guess. And Lightfield, which is an all celluloid-based film festival, but I think not in the context of the festival everybody's in right now. It's a very different experience.
Oh yeah.
And I think all of these other projects, correct me if I'm wrong, they all hold the same sort of importance. They all are in conversation with each other all the time and are all in their own just existence deeply political. So maybe you could talk about these other projects and how they inform ARC.
Yeah, sure. I mean, they all kind of spring out of each other in a certain sense and feed back into each other. And Black Hole started I started Black Hole, I should say, or maybe, yeah, Black Hole started in my living space, my living room. And it was a sense that, I'd been thinking about opening a space for a while, but money was always going to be an issue, is always an issue. And I had the ability to get, I lived in a warehouse with way too many other people. And, but we had this open space. We were all kind of committed to having this idea of, inviting the public in and opening up the public space, private space into the public space, or enmeshing the idea of what is private and public. And for me, that was really important because I had to pay the rent somehow, so I didn't have to worry about charging a fee, but really the important thing was that I didn't want to charge a fee to begin with because largely it relates to class and this kind of boogeyman of the art world and the film world that no one really can have the ability to talk about because, well, most people come from the upper classes that are involved in this industry. And those of us that don't kind of tend to be cut off from it in both like logistic terms, like we are priced out, or there's this idea that the working class or the poor cannot understand art or not appreciate it or don't have the time for it, which is a reality. I mean, some people, are tired after they get home from working all day and don't have the ability to go to the cinema, but there are people that really love it. And really there's not a lot of things coming to working class people or poor people and like directly addressing them, in the art world. And so it's always an idea of you have to kind of claw your way in if you're allowed in at all. And one thing I thought was that, I am always priced out of culture, even culture that I have a part in producing, And so I thought if I was going to start a space, I was going to curate for people that maybe were coming from a similar spectrum of class as me, and or lower, or lower, but the central thing in that was really money, and it's like I had to make sure that my bases were covered in rent and all that, but I didn't want to ask people for that. I wanted to be able to, do the work, do a shitty job so you can come home and do the work that you want to do. And part of that to me was that I needed to have it in the space that I lived so I could take care of my rent, and then I could open it up and just say, it's free to come in. There's no bar in that regard. It's in my living room, so some people feel a little more comfortable coming to that than, say, a cinema like this if they think that they're cut off culturally in a way that they don't know the meaning of it, or they feel talked down to because they don't know why this flickering shape is important or something, and I always just say, if you think it's interesting, you understand it, and you don't have to think about the history of it. It's if there's this kid that came to one of my screenings. I feel like this is a good way to talk about this. I mean, not to infantilize anybody, but I'm saying there was a literal child that came to one of the screenings with his father, and he came up to me afterwards, the dad did, and he said, it was a pretty difficult program too, very flicker heavy. It's like not, I was proud of him. And he came up and he said, he was really into it, but he didn't know what it meant. And I said, whatever you thought it meant, that's what it meant. Even if you don't know what that is, it's like wherever you apprehend it, that's the meaning of it, you know,
Right,
because
or
it's
maybe that
subjective.
meaning is just a feeling also. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be an intellectual meaning.
Exactly. But anyway, I'm getting a little far afield in that sense, but, you know, black hole was always free in the sense that, like, it was free to come in. But the thing is that everyone also worked there, because the idea was that we were building, it wasn't just a entertainment that I was offering for people. It was a community I was trying to build, a community that I was trying to make a space for. And the community builds itself, you know. And that's the work that everyone was also involved in. But, you know, we would have filmmakers come, and I would make in a donation jar known, but I would say, you don't have to, your relationship with that jar is your own thing, you know? Because there's people that come, you know, they can afford to pay or whatever, but I'm just like, I don't care, you know? Like, I don't want someone to, I don't want to be at a door and say, do you have money or you don't? Because even that, some people feel stigmatized about. So that was really important to me, is still important to me. The space got evicted because of capitalist vampire landlords and a lot of other things. And we're working to, you know, with a couple of other spaces in Oakland to provide that conceptual and physical space again. And so out of the kind of ground of that community sprung both Black Hole Film Lab and Lightfield. And really it came out of necessity of Black Hole came out of necessity of me, you know, collectively owning means of production that were being deemed obsolete by the newest digital tools that are going to be obsolete themselves in 5 years or less. And in the meantime, there's all this physical equipment being jettisoned from all these different institutions. And so we, spurred by some people in the, you know, really international artist-run film lab movement, people kind of, there's a lot of knowledge sharing, a lot of really, you know, people really, it's a real mission for a lot of people. I think a very minimal amount of these artist-run film labs all over the world are commercial-based. They're really focused on, you know, we're being left alone in the dust to rot with our equipment, and if we don't take care of each other, then no one's going to do this for us. So you know, you can ask someone on this Film Labs board a variety of different, like, basic things, like how do you fix a projector, or how do you contact print with a Bolex, or, you know, all these different things. And through that, we were able to get this 100-year-old, like our collective was able to get this 100-year-old, over 100-year-old contact printer, which is built for 35 millimeter, and we didn't, but someone at some point modified it to be 16 millimeter. Our lab got evicted a year ago, but I moved it into my little kind of carport that's only big enough to fit the contact printer. So all the films I made were on that. And then I went and processed it in my sink with all the, you know, the lab's collective Lomo tank. But we got a new space, and we're working on building it out. Currently, the collective members are meeting every month and helping build it out, even while I'm over here. And it's truly a collective. It's like everyone pulls their own weight in it. It's really, it's a beautiful thing. So I have to say, I don't run it. Yeah. And the same with Lightfield. You know, Lightfield is a collective of 7 people, artist-run collective that really started from people, we're all filmmakers that, well, 1 or 2 of us would like to fancy themselves more as poets than filmmakers, but, you know, they have a toe in the stream. But it's people that kind of were involved in a lot of different film festivals, were going to a lot of different film festivals, and really saw this inadequacy of support for filmmakers and really like this level of exploitation that larger film festivals get into, which is like, no one, pretty much standard that no one really pays filmmakers for showing work. And, that's problematic to a huge degree. And I guess just kind of like looking at that, we started from this idea of like this ethics of what we thought needed to be represented. But rather than just constantly talking shit on other people, we were like, maybe let's find a way to do it ourselves. And we're not trying to lead by example or anything. We're not trying to be leaders whatsoever. We're just kind of trying to carve out a hovel within the poison space of professional capitalist film festivals that just kind of use up both filmmakers and workers and curators and just jettison them when they're no longer useful,
Yeah, and I know you said that a lot of this came from your time working and not working, but participating in Occupy in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And if you can maybe talk a bit about that, because we have a clip from a film that wasn't in the program, but I think is really important for this work, to understand this.
Yeah. So that was part of a series of films I was shooting during Occupy Oakland that were under an even different moniker. I was calling a Moja Pravda newsreel, which has its own etymology I won't get into right now, but it stands for, well, no, yeah, I actually won't get into it, but basically I was shooting them as kind of subjective newsreels, and I was thinking like, there's this, for anyone that, I know there's probably a manifestation of it here also, but in Oakland it was this real groundswell of activity, and all these people that wouldn't normally work together, didn't normally work together, kind of like for this brief moment there was this removal of the isolated grid of regulation of activists, communities and intersections and people that were not activists at all, and not professional activists, not even really political beforehand, kind of like very briefly getting together and working together and glimpsing possibilities of collectivity, before eventually factionalizing again and whatnot. But there was this moment that I kind of call the wild zone before the grid is put it back on it to factionalize it, and that it's very generative of the possibilities of social configuration and action. And out of that period of time, so those things were like things that I was shooting. I lived very close to where Occupy was happening. I didn't actually camp there, but I sometimes would spend the night there just up, I lived a couple blocks away, so I was kind of like on call or whatever, and whenever there was an action or whatever, there was just day to day. And I was shooting these Super 8 newsreels, and I was thinking of them as newsreels. They were really just kind of like I don't believe in documentary. I don't believe in objectivity. It's always someone's bringing a subjective aspect to it, even if they're trying to quiet it, and so in that regard, you kind of either make reportage or you make propaganda or whatever, but it's kind of the same thing, And so what I was trying to do with those was like, I can't represent an objective view of it. I can't represent someone else's reality. Moja Pravda stands for my truth, whether or not it's, an accurate term or not, whatever truth is. But I was kind of working on translating that. And I would show them at certain different occupations, and they were meant really not to show it to an outside audience. They were meant to kind of bolster an energy within those encampments. And I stopped showing them for a while because this museum, Yerba Buena Art Center, took kind of crappy versions of them that I'd put online briefly, and put them in a looping station in one of their exhibitions, a very problematic exhibition called Occupy Bay Area. Didn't tell me, didn't pay me, and I didn't find out about it until I was up for 3 months, and I'd planned all kinds of, revenge, basically, that didn't really pan out, but I didn't really do anything. But then I just stopped showing them for a while because I thought, well, if these leeches can, claim that level of authenticity or whatever with just kind of like a download link, then I'm going to complicate it for them a little bit. But it also meant that they did stop showing. So occasionally I like to drag them out a little bit. But anyway, I guess what I wanted to get at was that during that time when people were thinking about the possibilities of social reconfiguration and claiming of public space or reclaiming or whatever, complicating public space, there was this idea of kind of starting a free film school, and I had just started Black Hole around that time. And the free film school idea, it led to a couple workshops, lots of really big meetings with people, and then really small meetings with people after the initial excitement wore off. But what came out of it was really that we weren't really educators, but we were interested in possibly educating ourselves in a communal way, and having that be like each one teach one type of thing. And that is essentially what laid the ground for Black Hole Film Lab to come out of.
And I think when you watch this footage, it could be Occupy, but it could also be 1969, but it could also be, 2016,
yeah.
or it could be BLM. It could be,
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of that also has to do with the material you choose. You were talking about how ephemeral the digital is, but I think it's not just ephemeral in a conceptual way. Like you can see when something was made because of the quote unquote style or image
Sure.
embedded in that technology. And I know there's a lot of reasons why you work with film material, not necessarily just because it looks quote unquote timeless or nostalgic or something. So maybe you could elaborate a bit on the importance of film material for your work.
Yeah. I mean, it is literally it's both very important and not important. I mean, I'm interested in material. And the thing is that it's not just, so the image isn't the medium, Like, image can be everything. Image is, it's like on one level, it's very important in the sense that it's got a physical kind of reality or whatever. We touch it, or we think we touch it. We look at it, and it's a thing in the world. But I mean, so is video. It's just a different medium. It works with. They both work with photons, but video works with pixels, which are I can't remember the base element, but it's it's like it's projected light. It's what it comes down to, and it uses the same brain chemistry and the same materials. So it's like we like to think that. I mean, and that's true for all art forms. Like all visual art uses the same materials, which are photons, or like, electrons and atoms, whatever, if you want to get down to it. Like when you get onto quantum level, we're all doing the same shit. But really, like, what separates them are essentially like distinctions that are defined by the capitalist mode of production and the entertainment industry and what it deems to be like effective. And I think that for me, I don't feel nostalgic about film because it's in the present day still. It's like, I remember when I was shooting that, I was working with the Bolex, and at one point, interface with a lot of cops when you're in the protests, and you try not to talk to them because you don't want to talk to them. But sometimes they talk to you or whatever. And it's like, one time one of them asked me, he said, hey, come over here. I thought he was going to tell me to get the fuck out or something. And he said, what kind of camera is that? I was like, oh, come on, man. And I was like, it's a Bolex. And then he said, oh, so you, like, what era is it? And I'm like, present day. I'm like, he kept asking a few more questions. I was like, I'm not going to talk to a fucking cop about film. But at the same time, it was this idea that, like, oh, you're using old film. And I'm like, no, I'm not using old film. I'm using film that was just manufactured. If you use old film, no image will come out. But I'm not going to talk to you about that. So anyway, yeah, film is I mean, if it's in the present day, it's a present object, and you can feel nostalgic about it, and, people can, art world people like Hito Steyr can say it's like nostalgic, and people use it for pretentious reasons. But I mean, it's got a material reality that people say black and white is pretentious, apparently. And I'm like, have you ever paid for color film stock? It's a material, like, it's so much cheaper to make stuff on black and white, I mean, if it's an option, if you're getting, like, the Tate Museum to pay for 75 millimeter or 70 millimeter, footage, and it's not a big deal, then, like, yeah, then, using black and white is pretentious. But it's, like, got material concerns. And I don't have a problem with video. I love video. I mean, the first piece is video. Actually, these are video, that's not, it's not, when you transfer something, it's not film anymore. But there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, you can make an image in macrame, and it's still an image, but it's different, And I think not enough, people talk about fetishization a lot, and I'm just kind of like, I'm not going to kink shame anybody, Everyone has their own fetishes. But film isn't a fetish for me. Like, I have fetishes, everyone does. But film is not one of them. I use it for its material importance for what I do. It's like, you can't separate frames and video in the same way. You can't pull it through a projector in the same way. It's just a different thing.
Yeah, and particularly with the expanded cinema or projector performance work, like, it's not reproducible in the same way. It's not something you can transact with and send a file. I think that was what was so special about having you here with so many distinct works, and you cannot repeat these events. I mean, even if you were to do the exact same program somewhere else, everything would be different, from the location to the audience, and the tactility and the kind of concrete reality of what film is. Mm-hmm. Makes it so that you have to be present. If you're not there for the screening, it never will happen for you. And
yeah, but I mean, also, you're always present wherever you are. If you're seeing something in live streaming, you're still a body in the room looking at it, and that's important to remember in these times where everything is moved online. But we're not online. We're a body in a room. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times we'd like to get away from that, but we're still there.
Yeah, would you maybe like to show the last clip, which is breathing, and we can...
Yeah, breathing. Breathing was, it came out of this idea of during the pandemic, I was reading a lot of texts and doing a lot of thinking about how everything was kind of, falling apart, and that this thing kept repeating in my head was that we need to learn new rhythms. We need to learn new ways of being, because our old ones are dying, literally. And at that point, I picked up this book by Franco Bifo Berardi called Breathing, which is where a lot of the texts from the film comes, combined with texts by Milford Graves and June Jordan and Clarice Lispector. And central to all of them is this idea that, like, Bifo talks about how chaos is not a thing that exists objectively in the world. It's a subjective thing that involves the disjunction of our understanding of like our life rhythm, what he calls the biorhythm, with the outerlying info stimuli, like the flow of information, the movement of the world. We can't make sense of it, but it's only because it's like our system can't measure it, And it's, if you get into etymology, reality essentially goes into the idea of the relation of things, but thing, it came originally, it was in the Pi languages, it meant a section of time. It meant a stretch of time. It moved into Norse languages, and it started to mean a time for meeting. And I think in Norway or somewhere, like parliament essentially translates to big thing. And then when it came into English, and it kind of meant everything, but it went into the singular idea of it could mean a rock, a human, a thought, anything. So it went from like totally abstract time to very distinct kind of communal gathering, civic even, and then to singular but totally abstract again. So when you think about if reality is relating to things, and things are everything, then it's just relation. And then you think about how qualities, like in physics teaches us that qualities don't exist in themselves. They only exist when measured by another system. One thing measures, like time is measuring the velocity of the universe as affected by the sun, creating a gravitational pull that moves planets in a certain way. But the sun isn't moving at a velocity on its own. It's moving at a velocity as measured by the humans on the Earth. And so the first person to count time was likely, there's a baboon fibula that was discovered with the first markings of someone in Western Africa that was likely marking a menstrual calendar. And so that was the first language, really, but also the first math and the first thing to establish time. And really what that did was like set this whole, that was kind of the birth of history, linear time in history. Anyway, this is a long, long tangent, but what I'm getting into is that like Bifo was saying that measurement, it's all about measurement, and chaos springs from the inability of our system to measure another system. But there's this period of breaking down that happens where you lose your idea of measurement, you lose the idea of making sense of this chaotic realm, and you just kind of exist with it. And then you can, through this idea of chaosmosis, you like learn to breathe with that, and you create something new, an intersubjective thing. And this idea during the pandemic was that everything was being, the biorhythm, as he called it, was being subsumed to the algorithm. And we were asked, the Black Hole Film Collective was asked to make this film program for San Francisco Cinematheque, which we have a lot of respect for. And we didn't want to, there's this weird juxtaposition of like where this group that works with physical material that can't be represented in its physical way. So rather than, we decided to do the online screening, but I thought rather than, just transfer a film and not say anything about it, I wanted to dig into it. So this film worked with those ideas, and it said, there's something that happens when you can't translate one medium to the other. You can't just like, for instance, take this system that's built on community and long run relations built up in that community, and isolate it to content. You can't just fit this huge thing into this tiny box and then resell it. And that's partially what this film is about.
So with that, before we run out of time, I just wanted to open up the conversation to anyone in the audience, if anyone has any questions or would like to say anything. Yes, please, in the back.
You talk a lot about physics and how that inspires your work, and I was interested in what kind of background you have in physics or where this inspiration comes from.
It's all kind of an obsession and a self-taught interest. It's I didn't study it. I'm a high school dropout. I never got a general equivalency diploma or anything like that. It's more just a deep love for it and an interest in it, and I learn it through lectures and books and conversations, really. But it's a lens that totally changed my understanding of art and reality as we see it. So I only hope to go deeper into it, you know.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else in the audience who has a question? It's a bit difficult for me to see because of the lights. So, one thing I'd like to kind of end on is, I know that, of course, ARC is this moving image process, but there's also quite a lot of other work that you do that actually isn't moving image based. We have actually a couple of images that we can show of some two-dimensional work that you do, and I thought maybe you could sort of finish with talking about some of these other projects.
Yeah, these are hard to represent in digital images, especially because these are pencil drawings and they're using particular type of color pencil. I mean, even really high quality transfers of them can't really get it because it's really about working with these lines I draw kind of it's just a ruler and colored pencil, but I really like to get at the edge of visibility and what it brings out in the eye and in the work. And I do them all by natural light in California, and there's a particular quality to the light there that you can't even, some of them you can't even see at night. I'll kind of draw the line as light as possible in some ways, like these sides here. And they're all individual small lines, but they seem like a mass sometimes, and they're really made for to hold and look close at, So it's even, I have a problem even exhibiting them at a gallery or something, because it's they need to be kind of held in an object in your hand. Yeah.
And are there any other projects that you're working on at the moment that are maybe in this vein or a continuation of this right now, or?
Well, this one's ongoing in the sense that that's another aspect of these. These were this idea of incrementally doing one of these a day for about 4 years, and now I come back to them occasionally, but I did them at least one or more a day from June of 2018 to sometime in 2022. So yeah, there's over 1,000 of them or so, but I mean, to me, they're directly connected to all of the other work that I do. It's just a different medium.
Different photons.
Yeah.
Does
Different photons.
anybody else have another question before we are out of time? Well, then I would like to say, first of all, that this program was originally started a year ago. It was in collaboration with my former colleague, Erwin van het Hart. And I just have to say thank you very much to Erwin, because without him, it would have been really difficult to put this together.
Impossible.
Impossible, yeah. And of course, I have to say, yeah, as an admirer of ARC as a project and a lover of Tooth as a person, I am so happy that you're here and that it all went so well. And I cried a lot, tears of extreme pride and joy. This was really a wonderful experience for me.
Yeah, thanks for making it possible.
Of course. Thank you guys for coming.